Hey everyone and welcome back to the channel. As November rolls around, we're all gearing up for turkey, stuffing, and family gatherings. But have you ever stopped to wonder about the story we're all told about the first Thanksgiving? You know that classic story about the Pilgrims and Native Americans sharing a big feast back in 1621. It's such a heartwarming tale, the kind you see in elementary school plays. But what if I told you that story is mostly a myth? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the real history of Thanksgiving. And trust me, it's a lot more complicated and a whole lot darker than you might think. So let's start with that famous 1621 event. The Pilgrims, after a brutal first year in their new settlement, had a surprisingly good harvest. To celebrate, they held a 3-day feast. And yes, members of the Wampanoag tribe were there. Around 90 of them, led by their chief Massacres. But here's the first twist. They weren't exactly invited guests in the way we imagine. Historical accounts suggest the Wampanoag showed up after hearing celebratory gunfire and came to investigate, possibly fearing they were under attack. Once they realized it was a celebration, they joined in, contributing 5 deer to the meal. This gathering was, by all accounts, a harvest festival. It was a secular event, a moment of relief and celebration after a period of extreme hardship. But here's the crucial point. The Pilgrims themselves would never have called this event Thanksgiving. For them, a day of Thanksgiving was something entirely different. It was a deeply religious occasion, a full day spent in solemn prayer and worship, usually to thank God for a specific blessing, like rain ending a drought or a victory in battle. It was about fasting and prayer, not feasting and games. It was a sober, religious observance, a far cry from the party-like atmosphere of the 1621 harvest meal. So, when did the Pilgrims have their first official Thanksgiving? According to their own definition, that happened 2 years later, in 1623, after a long, severe drought threatened their crops and their very survival. A day of prayer was held. Rain came shortly after, saving the harvest. In response, Governor William Bradford declared a formal day of thanksgiving to God. The 1623 event, a day of quiet, religious gratitude, is what the Pilgrims would have recognized as their first true Thanksgiving. It had no big feast, no native guests, and none of the imagery we associate with the holiday today. The 1621 feast was just a one-time party that was largely forgotten for centuries. So how did a forgotten harvest festival become the foundation of our national holiday? The story didn't really resurface until the 19th century. In the 1840s, a writer and editor named Sarah Josepha Halley, you might know her as the author of Mary Had a Little Lamb, began a campaign to make Thanksgiving a national holiday. She was searching for a unifying national story, something to bring a country that was deeply divided over issues like slavery together. She stumbled upon a letter written by a Pilgrim leader, Edward Winslow, which described the 1621 feast. Halley romanticized this event, creating the peaceful, harmonious image of Pilgrims and Native Americans sharing a meal that we know today. She lobbied presidents for decades. And finally, in 1863, in the midst of the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln declared a national day of Thanksgiving. Lincoln was also looking for a way to unite a fractured nation. And this sanitized, idealized story of unity from the country's founding served that purpose perfectly. It was a powerful piece of national mythology, a story that made Americans feel good about their origins. The problem is, it erases the much more complex and often brutal reality of the relationship between European colonists and Native Americans. And this is where the story takes a much darker turn. While the 1621 event wasn't a Thanksgiving, there were other days of Thanksgiving declared by the colonists that were anything but peaceful. Let us talk about one of the most horrifying examples, the Pequot Massacre of 1637. Tensions between English colonists in Connecticut and the powerful Pequot tribe had been escalating. The colonists, wanting to expand their territory and control trade, launched a brutal attack on a fortified Pequot village near the Mystic River. What happened next was a slaughter. Colonial soldiers, along with their Narragansett and Mohegan allies, surrounded the village and set it on fire. As the inhabitants, mostly women, children, and the elderly, tried to flee the flames, they were shot down or forced back into the fire. An estimated 400 to 700 Pequot people were killed in a single hour. It was an act of genocide. And how did the colonists commemorate this horrific event? The governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop, declared a day of Thanksgiving to celebrate the colonists' victory. They were literally giving thanks to God for the successful massacre of hundreds of people. This isn't an isolated incident. Throughout the colonial period, days of Thanksgiving were frequently declared to celebrate military victories over Native American tribes. These celebrations were about conquest and domination, not friendship and shared harvests. This is a side of the Thanksgiving story that is almost always left out, but it's a critical part of the history. For many Native Americans, Thanksgiving is not a day of celebration, but a day of mourning, a reminder of the genocide, land theft, and cultural destruction that followed the arrival of European colonists. This brings us back to the myth of the first Thanksgiving. Why does it persist so strongly? Because it's a comforting story. It smooths over the rough edges of our history. It presents the founding of America as a peaceful, cooperative venture, rather than the violent conquest it often was. The image of the shared meal suggests a relationship of equals, a friendship that was, in reality, temporary and quickly replaced by conflict. This is a disease and displacement for the Wampanoag and other tribes. Within a generation of that one-timed harvest feast, their relationship had completely broken down, culminating in the brutal King Philip's War, which devastated Native American communities across New England. So, what should we do with this information? Should we cancel Thanksgiving? Not necessarily, but we can change how we think about it and how we talk about it. We can use it as an opportunity to learn and to acknowledge the full, complicated truth of our history. We can teach our children the real story, not just the myth. We can acknowledge that for Native Americans, this holiday carries a legacy of pain and loss. It's about adding to the story, not erasing it. We can still gather with family, we can still be grateful for the good things in our lives, but we can do it with a deeper and more honest understanding of where the holiday comes from. True gratitude involves acknowledging the whole truth, the good and the bad. This year, as you sit down for your Thanksgiving meal, maybe take a moment to reflect on this hidden history. Think about the Wampanoag people who shared that first harvest, and the difficult centuries that followed for them and all indigenous peoples. By understanding the real story, we can move towards a more honest and just future. The myths might be comfortable, but the truth, while often difficult, is always more powerful. Hope you found this video eye-opening. If you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing for more fun history dives. Drop your thoughts in the comments. How does this shift your view on Thanksgiving? Let's chat soon.